Good morning, welcome to the show. My name is Wallace Chapman. It's great to be with you till 11 a.m. this morning. And to come, we have the soundtrack to your life, our ever popular series where we interview New Zealanders, well-known New Zealanders, about their lives and their music. That's from 9 till 10 a.m. From 10 till 11 a.m. we talk the latest census and what can it tell us about the way and the direction that New Zealand is heading. Very interesting stuff. So that is from 10 till 11 this morning. This hour, though, David Cunliffe and Shane Jones pulling the waka there. You saw Waitangi Day. Also, Australia is bullying us when it comes to supermarkets. What can we do? Texting and driving and a whole lot more. With us now, we have Selwyn Manning. Selwyn, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Wallace.
And Rodney Hyde, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. First up, Waitangi Day. Rodney, 10 being the best and 1 being the worst. What did you think of Waitangi Day 2014?
Oh, it would have to be a 7 or 8 in the sense that there was no ugly incidents that sort of dominated the news cycle.
Yeah. So 7 or 8, what do you reckon, Selwyn?
About a 1 for accuracy at the front end of it for the Prime Minister. I mean, whoever is providing him information about what is going down up there was certainly needing to plug in or perhaps even turn up to have a look at what was going down. But yes, I think Waitangi seemed to have a let's get down to business type of aspect to it.
Might we have turned a corner in terms of public perception, because there's a collective rolling of the eyes when it comes to the newspapers and media and the jostling, but there wasn't that much of that this time around at all.
And there were a few breakthroughs. You saw the Green co-leader as women standing there speaking on issues there, which was something that even Helen Clark was not obviously in her early stages able to crack. So there's a lot going on, but I think the big thing there was John Key putting the gauntlet down, putting that challenge to Ngapuhi to perhaps sort themselves out. I think was kind of the nature of his message, to come through with some sort of unified thing, and the government would make a settlement of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment into Northland. And I think that needs to be looked at, see how effective it's going to be, and certainly the New Zealand Herald has been attempting to do that from the mainstream end. It's good.
Yeah. The Ngapuhi settlement, Rodney Hyde, Key saying urging Ngapuhi to put aside their personal differences and unite to focus on the big prize. What's the big prize? An upfront incentive of some big cash settlement. What do you reckon?
I think the whole thing is sad. Put aside, whether the settlements are a good idea or not, and I think the Herald editorial illustrates the sadness of it, because here we have a region that's very deprived. And the view being pushed is that we can fix the problem with a treaty settlement. Now, let's take the upper end of that, the 500 million. That's only social welfare spending for a week. Now, whatever you think of the settlement, it's not going to actually fix the problems of Northland. And, of course, the other difficulty, and we're seeing this with Ngapuhi in particular, the other difficulty that we have with these settlements is essentially they're funding a tribal structure, which creates very difficult politics, very difficult economics. And in the sense for Ngapuhi, it's a bit artificial, because the government is saying, here's this big fat carrot of money. If you can sort of pretend that you've got a structure there that'll work, we'll give it to you. So I think the sad thing is it takes our eye off the ball, which is what to do with deprived regions, because there's no way a treaty settlement will provide a regional development.
That's actually quite a good point, Selwyn. That's because they're masking it, aren't they, as some sort of regional development thing where, he talks in terms of Northland being underdeprived, which is true, but 500 million won't fix that.
No, it won't. But I think, structures and things are really important. For example, if that money was going to be going up there, what's the receiving apparatus? What's the framework for receiving that money? Where are the governance kind of levels to make sure that it's applied into the right areas? There was money that went up in the late 1990s, just prior to the national New Zealand First coalition losing that election. It was only months before, I think it was, and that money was hard to tie down. That was a significant amount that was supposed to be going across for the building of facilities up at Waitangi, etc. To my knowledge, a lot wasn't done around that, and the money was hard to, like I say, tie down. I think here too there's a problem in the sense that, well, first off, a lot of iwi around the country have clearly made good of their settlement money and their investments. We've seen prosperity coming through. But there's also that message too, that iwi need to honour their own people. It's a bit, as a Pākehā, it's difficult for me to kind of sit here and sound preachy. But when we've seen things that where investments have been in the areas where the labour is being provided by offshore workers, in the sense of on the fishing boats, etc., then there are lessons there, I think, that we need to learn. If and once again, it sounds preachy coming from a Pākehā, but I think those kind of things that can benefit the people should benefit the people. And if anything is going to be a criticism on this, it would be, is that trickle-down money going to work for the people in the actual areas, the workers, etc.? There's question marks around that, and really those question marks need to be answered not just by the iwi but by the government too.
Well, Rodney,
they can be answered quite easily, actually, because the short answer is no. And the situation is this: tribalism has been the predominant way that human societies have organised themselves, whether they were hunter-gatherers or primitive agrarian societies. That's how we've mostly lived. But when we've had tribal structures, of course, we've never been able to live much above, subsistence.
Except the tribal cultures have become corporate in many respects.
Of course they do. They have to. The tribal structures don't sort of match and fit with a modern industrialised world. And so Selwyn's quite right. We're actually creating this corporate monolith being propped up by the taxpayer largesse and pretending that somehow this is regional development, somehow this is closing the gap, somehow this is helping Maori. I don't see it.
Well, but hang on. But when you look at examples like the monoliths now that are the regional financial base that entities like Tainui have, it's nothing short of phenomenal what they're doing.
No,
Ngāi Tahu.
I absolutely disagree.
Why?
And I'll tell you why. Well, because, the way that people prosper, and it doesn't matter whether you're brown, yellow, white, green, whatever, is actually by getting on, being industrious, by learning. And the trouble with the treaty settlement process is it actually sends this big dollop of cash, out of the government, plops it into this corporate structure. Of course, a corporate structure can throw around a bit of money and put out a PR exercise, but it doesn't actually create that culture of actually learning, of getting ahead. What it does actually is create a culture of supplicancy, not even to a tribal structure, but to a corporate structure.
No, but hang on.
The way to get ahead.
No, but haven't they created wealth? Haven't they, from that original settlement, say take Tainui, they've created great wealth and expanded on their original money. And
but creating wealth within a corporate structure doesn't make a people rich.
Yeah, that's my point. That the challenge here is that the trickle down actually be made to work, and that's a government responsibility as much as the iwi corporates. I think too that National has very much had the Māori Party on side, perhaps representing the Māori corporate elite. The problem there is there isn't a strong political representation within the government's executive, within the just outside the beehive, but at at ministerial level, that is plugging into the people so much. And that John Key's got to answer that. If this money's going to go across, one, what's the frame that's going to receive that money? And secondly, from the iwi and the partnership with the Crown, what is going to happen to that? And I think all New Zealanders should have interest in what happens at the end of the day.
Right. And
the big value being created here too, Wallace, is actually within the Resource Management Act, because these corporate structures get into a favoured situation within the Resource Management Act in terms of what developments can go ahead and what can't. And of course they get to partner, and that actually pushes through a resource development. And you're seeing this nowhere more significantly than Christchurch, that to get ahead you need to get Ngāi Tahu on board in order to get the various consents. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, take away government support, take away government largesse, take away the preference that we're giving through the Resource Management Act to these corporate structures, supposedly tribal structures, then where in the world does tribalism generate economic prosperity for people?
But on the other hand, you could say this is what we want Māori to have. They have
Who's we?
Well, people who represent the views I'm about to say, and that is, for once and for all, you have with the Ngāi Tahu thing, you've got financial Māori autonomy. So why shouldn't you go to ask for consent to Ngāi Tahu?
Well, interestingly, you don't have Maori autonomy, and I guess that's my point. You might have the iwi leaders feeling very autonomous because they're sitting on top of a corporate structure where they have a large amount of economic and political power. But you go and ask a down-and-out Ngāi member how they feel about it, because unless they're on side within that corporate structure, it doesn't benefit them.
Let's pull it back. You know, in this country, we live in a bicultural type of frame, right? Where we've got the Treaty of Waitangi that we all have to honour in this way. The settlements are obviously going some way toward that. But there is also, in extending that bicultural obligation, a role for all of us to make sure that all peoples in this country prosper. And I think what Rodney is talking about there is underscoring something that I think is a right, and it should be there, that the consultation that is going both ways is set in stone. If the treaty is going to be negotiated as New Zealand inches toward being a republic, well, that's another argument. You know, is Māori going to be excluded from the outcome there? One would hope not, and one would imagine that Māoridom would resist every step toward New Zealand becoming independent if that was the case.
Certainly a very fascinating topic.
Just final, Wallace, just quickly, you know, how come Māori are doing so well in Australia, where they don't have the settlements, compared to their cousins and brothers and sisters within New Zealand where they do?
Indeed. 20 minutes past 8 o'clock. Your viewpoints on this, I'd love to hear from you. Text live to 3920. We're with Selwyn Manning and Rodney Hyde. A little bit on Waitangi Day and also other things. Banning Facebook and also a supermarket banning New Zealand products over in Australia. All that and more. We're back very soon. 25 minutes past 8 o'clock. Actually, just one final comment on Waitangi. Who came out well, Rodney, do you think, then? Just looking at the day itself, did you love the photo opportunity of, and it was a great photo of David Cunliffe and Shane Jones rolling their sleeves up and pulling that waka in, leading the nation.
Well, I love your poetry, but I'm afraid probably like 98.5% of other New Zealanders, I didn't take a blind notice of it. I didn't really celebrate the day.
Right.
And I didn't see the picture.
Okay. What do you reckon, Selwyn?
It was pretty cheesy.
It was cheesy,
what
eh?
What more can you say?
Yeah, it was pretty cheesy. It sounds like they got a tip off and ran to the waka.
Yeah, at first I was looking at the photo and didn't look at the headline of the story, and I was thinking, what are they doing, tug of war or something? You know, what's the symbolism here?
Yeah. Hey, here is a very interesting... I'm just reading your piece in the Herald on Sunday this morning, Rodney. It's brilliant. Labour's revenue spokesman, David Clark, has produced the best tax policy yet. It shows perfectly the modern state's rapaciousness and is perfectly in step with present-day tax policy. It's simple, it's clear, it's to the point. The banning Facebook. Tell us about this.
Well, I'm writing tongue-in-cheek, I hope you noticed.
Yeah, I know.
The idea is that, you know, the government, it doesn't matter who's in power, you know, they're desperate for all the cash they can get. It's hard to get, and they've turned the law inside out. They've got a very rapacious government and department doing that. And, of course, this was sort of the dizzy limit, whereby you say, doesn't matter what the law says, we're going to sit down with you. This is David Clark's proposal. We're going to sit down with you. We're going to decide what's fair and reasonable for you to pay.
Yeah.
And if you don't agree, we'll kick you out of the country, which would be extraordinary for the over 2 million users of Facebook. But the picture here isn't that even you have to comply with the law. I mean, normally what governments and Parliament have done have said, here are the rules for paying tax. No one's suggesting that Facebook's breaking those rules.
Yeah, this is the big thing here. I think, first off, I think
it was a boo-boo of David Clark to say it.
You know, when you get a person that is not a leader of a party in opposition
to say this,
no, to get into the news with an issue, they've almost got to make a boo-boo to actually get there.
It's like Shane Jones and the shower heads.
Yeah, all of that. So making a boo-boo like this, it got the headline in there, and then they hope to probably explain the rationale behind why they did it. But put all that to the side for a moment. Put that to the side. And what we've got here is an international challenge. Right now, in the last month and going through the next few months, there are international forums, the most significant level, that are trying to figure out how they get a revenue from multinational online type of entities, and particularly in the digital, where the barriers and the fences of the territories or the economies or the countries no longer applicable. So this isn't just New Zealand. New Zealand has conceded by the Prime Minister down that it can't do this alone. It's got to work with the international bodies on this.
Rodney?
Well, it was hardly a boo-boo because David Cunliffe actually initially supported the proposal and to look at banning Facebook if they didn't pay more tax. And it was only the next day. Yes, it was only the next day. So this wasn't a boo-boo by David Clark. He's not that stupid. And, of course, it's part of the hysteria where people are looking at total revenues, deciding, your tax should be based on that, and failing to grasp that Parliament and government's job is to make the rules.
Well, hang on, so my tax is based on total revenue. Why shouldn't Facebook's tax be based on that?
Or Google Ads?
Well, actually, your tax isn't based on that because you're working for a business that gets to deduct all its costs, including the costs of employing you. So what you'll find is that across New Zealand, you get taxed as a business as your net income. And, of course, yes, it is complicated when you've got transnational borders and you've got intellectual property and you've got social media. But the challenge for Parliament and the challenge for a government is to design a set of rules around that work across all businesses the same.
Yeah, but my point, Rodney, and I'm sure you'd agree, is that this is an international issue that has been debated. For New Zealand to attempt to do it in its isolation would be stupid. That it's got to actually do it in train, incognito, if you like, with the others.
The Mugabe approach of the Labour Party, which says cough up or we'll kick you out of the country, is really cutting your nose off to spite your face.
I think they certainly, I'd imagine from the observations, they certainly realise that. But
keep that point in your head, guys, because we'll follow up on this right after the news update. It's 8:30. It is 35 minutes past 8 o'clock. Clary says, hi Wallace, I was very interested in your interview that was aired before 8 a.m. with a Dunedin lad who was based in Shanghai, growing up in New Zealand. Now that'll be online later on in the afternoon. That was with Scott Brown. Text live to 38920. You can email me, go to the Sunday show page on the RadioLive website. You can email me from there, and it's right here. Love to hear your feedback. Just picking up where we left off there, because I cut you folk off just a little bit. In terms of the multinationals paying tax, Rodney Hyde, it certainly is not just an issue here, but it's also a big issue. It's been to the House in the UK as well, where they are looking at multinationals like Starbucks, like Google, who have restructured their business in the sense that they make a debt, but they're paying hardly any tax at all. So it's an issue not just for us.
Sure. And to someone like me, it doesn't worry me all that much because I think the services that these companies provide are astronomical. I mean, it's hard to imagine now a world without Google. And, of course, governments are sitting there and they can't take enough money off people to spend on all the things they want to spend, so they're coming up new and inventive ways as though somehow making governments rich will make us rich. It won't. And, of course, the danger is these taxes are invariably counterproductive. And that's what I liked about, Labour's one-day policy, it only lasted a day, of banning Facebook. Because, I can imagine Facebook wouldn't care much about losing New Zealand, but 2 million New Zealanders would be beside themselves and unlikely to vote.
Isn't the philosophy of tax, I mean, the whole premise of a tax is actually contributing your bit to society, whether you are
not at all.
a single, yes it is, it's a single person, or you're a major company or whatever. It's actually stumping up, it's a levy to help fund society.
I couldn't disagree more. What you contribute to society is the work that you do, is the help that you give your community, is raising your kids. What tax is governments taking money because they believe that politicians can spend the money that you earn better than you can spend it. Now, the evidence for that is slim.
Said like a true ACT leader, Rodney. To me, sitting back here...
I mean, at least I'm consistent.
Absolutely.
Well, hang on. What is tax for?
Well, obviously it pays for things like when your parents or your family need to go to hospital, whether it be acute, but in large proportions for elective surgery, for your children's education, for the police on the streets, etc., etc.
The army.
And the army, all of that, but also in a country like New Zealand that is a developing nation, in my view, where we're developing an infrastructure, roading, etc., etc. Now, the irony of this whole thing here to me is that those parties like National and ACT, they held hands when they advanced a shift more into consumer-based taxation, away from taxing the income of people to one where you purchased and were taxed on your purchase. Now it seems like they don't want to debate this where there's a consumption going on with those multinational companies, but they don't want to look at taxing that. And if you're going to move to a consumer-based taxation, well, why not do what their structure is set up to do? If they're going to minimise the income tax on the population, well, start taxing Google, start taxing Facebook, start doing that. But the world is looking at this. It's not just New Zealand. And you've got to just remember that.
Two quick responses to that. Companies don't pay GST. They don't pay a consumption tax. It's always the final consumer, ultimately, who pays that tax. And the second thing is, yes, you're right, National and ACT did increase it from 12.5% to 15%, to my eternal shame. But don't forget that Labor introduced it at 10%, put it up to 12.5%. So, if you like, National's only responsible for the last little bit of it.
Yeah, but the institution of it was people inside Labor that were naturally ACT people in the end.
Philosophically, just before we move on, because it is quite interesting, the whole idea of tax and why we get tax. What would be an ideal, I guess, in your scenario, Rodney? What would be an ideal way that a society gets taxed? Is it a across the board flat rate, say at 15%, or what might it be?
Well, in a practical way, I can't see why you couldn't run society with no income tax and a consumption tax of, say, 10%, a GST of 10%, and in return we would pay our own way because we'd be so much richer, and of course the economy would be growing so high. And then what you would do is, with that money, you'd also be looking after the people that couldn't look after themselves.
But you'd need the trickle-down theory to work, which Rodney said earlier doesn't work with respect to the earnings.
I think it doesn't trickle down when you have a free market. It actually pours down and rains down.
Point to a country where it's happened.
Well, just look at Google, look at Hong Kong, look at New Zealand, where it was 150 years ago and where it is now. We're far richer than our grandparents were.
I don't think
it doesn't rain down when government actually hands out money, because government doesn't have any money of its own. It only gets the money that it gets to take off everyone else.
This is a philosophical discussion, but a government doesn't hand out in this sense. When we're talking social provision like police on the streets, do you think the police, the cops, are getting handouts from the government? That just doesn't stack.
Well, that's a word. I mean, the money that they're paying the police are being taken compulsorily, and if you don't pay your tax, you go to jail.
I actually might do an hour on tax sometime. This is actually really fascinating talk. The philosophy and ideas of tax, trickle down and such like. Hey, just moving on into other news here. The other big news, Rodney and Selwyn, I guess for New Zealand, was this very aggressive Buy Australia made on behalf of some supermarkets, Coles and Woolworths. What's been happening there is that they are promoting Buy Australia to the extent that they are taking and stripping, someone used that word, New Zealand products off the shelves and replacing them with Australian-made goods. What do you think, and how should we respond?
Right. Well, first off, I think that it's kind of, once again, it's weird in the sense that on the back of that we had both Tony Abbott, Prime Minister of Australia, and John Key saying that New Zealand and Australia were working to one export market and really advancing that. And on the other side, we're getting, in practical terms, in real world terms, blocking of New Zealand product on the shelves over in Australia. And what can New Zealanders do about that? Well, realise that we are a consumer base that's important to Australia too. Coles, by way of Countdown, for example, is Australian owned. Are New Zealanders going to start boycotting those like they did when the French bombed here in New Zealand and French products were boycotted all over?
Is that the answer? I mean, Rodney, I don't know what you make of this, but when I heard this, I felt a sense of this is bullying. I don't know what you make of it.
Well,
are they allowed to do it?
I don't know what the law is under CER, but of course, in the practical sense, it seems to me that if you're a business, you can choose to stock your shelves with whatever goods you choose. So if you want to be a French shop and sell French goods in New Zealand and only French goods, I can't see what the problem is. Now, what this does to me is suggest an opportunity because our goods are cheaper and better than Australia. It gives us a great opportunity to get a leg up and actually take some business off these guys by actually establishing businesses within Australia, because under CER, Kiwi businesses are fully entitled to set themselves up in Australia. And, you know, this is the stupidity of all buy New Zealand-made campaigns or buy Australian-made campaigns. Ultimately, they're colour-productive. And we're just upset, I think, because the government has been sponsoring a Buy New Zealand campaign here in New Zealand for years.
Oh, but not really. I mean, it's under the radar. It's just a sticker, really. I mean, it's not we're not talking about an aggressive Buy New Zealand-made campaign, Rodney, where you can support your local products, you can support your local manufacturing, and you can buy high-quality goods. For example, you might like to buy, as I did a couple of years ago, a beautiful wool New Zealand-made coat.
All of that's great. You know, the expectation was that our Prime...
What's that? Sorry, Rodney, what's that?
That's your choice, and it should be an Australian's choice. If they want to buy Australian-made, they're perfectly entitled to. I don't see how you can come along and say you can't buy Australian goods, you've got to buy Kiwi goods. If the supermarkets and the consumers respond to that and want to be patriotic and buy dearer and poorer quality produce, I can't see why or how you can stop them, just like you felt good buying something New Zealand that was higher priced but better quality.
At the end of the day, John Key was expected to go over there and put a strong message for New Zealanders, New Zealand businesses, New Zealand exporters, that kind of thing hopefully would cease. Obviously, at the end of those meetings with Tony Abbott, there was no political way that he could do that. That the references were, well, you can try your luck through the legal areas. So it all comes back on to, if New Zealanders don't like what's happening in Australia, they can do something about that when they go shopping.
Yes, picking up on that, Selwyn, and reflecting on your comments about Waitangi and Australia, I'm getting the sense you don't like John Key.
Not at all. I think he's one of the most popular prime ministers we've had. He was one of the only, I think, when he first became leader, that when I was walking along, and I hadn't had much to do with John Key at that stage, who spotted me in a crowd and waved out. Now, no one does that. Even my brothers and sisters probably wouldn't notice me walking in a crowd. But
they might know you better.
Maybe they do, Rodney. But the fact of the matter is it doesn't come down to a personal like here. It's about how a person functions. John Key was going over there to do a job. Did he represent New Zealand? I'm sure he did in many circles, but that was one that was high on the agenda and there wasn't a result.
In the moving along, because it is quite interesting the way our relationship here, Rodney, Australia and New Zealand, what about the rules that came in 2001 on, and I understand that Helen Clark did sign off on it, and that is the relinquishing of certain rights that New Zealand has. For example, access to their social security, access to certain services, for example, disability services you can't get access to, and as I understand it, citizenship as well. What do you make of that? Do you think that we're being treated unfairly? Kiwis in Australia?
Well, quite possibly unfairly, but it's the same for any country. You know, they're in charge of their domestic policy. And in a way, we treat, Indonesians and people escaping hellholes around the Pacific and the wider world because we don't give them automatic citizenship and a right to our...
So on that point, so New Zealanders are getting out of a hellhole or something, so we're supposed to accept second-class citizenship or status, I should put, once we're in Australia. I mean, there's an inequality there. We don't do the same to Australians coming here, so shouldn't it be a level playing field? If we're looking at level playing field export markets, which don't exist, why don't we try and get it socially as well?
But that's up to Australia, isn't it?
Well, it is, and if they don't want to play ball, surely New Zealand should just replicate basically their same policies.
I'm sure they'd notice because, historically, the big flow has been from New Zealand to Australia, something like 750,000 Kiwis living in Australia. There hasn't been that same big flow from Australia to New Zealand.
But there has an investment terms, Coles, the banks, etc.
It's not the Anzac spirit. I guess it's not the Australian New Zealand way, Rodney.
Well, maybe, but again, a country's going to decide these things. I think if we had 750,000 Australians turn up here, we might be looking sideways at it also.
We've got Australian banks coming out our ears. We've got Australian supermarkets coming out our ears. So therefore, there is an ability of New Zealanders. It is an important place for many Australian business interests. So there is a way that New Zealand can address
through, Selwyn. Just think that through for a minute. You're saying, okay, because you're not going to give benefits and automatic citizenship to New Zealanders in Australia who decide to hop on a plane and turn up there, what we're going to do is kick your investment out of the country. Who do you think that'll hurt the most?
No, it's not what I said. It's a consumer response I'm talking about here. And the other thing too is New Zealanders, irrespective of whether or not you're Prime Minister, right down to a person going out over there looking for work, expected to bow and scrape and fawn before our Australian leaders.
But that consumer response that you're talking about is precisely the response in Australia of Coles Supermarket and others that you're complaining about here.
Well, if that's the reality, well then just map the reality on this side of the ditch.
Yeah.
I know it's a big issue for listeners here. You might want to text in your response here. Text live to 3920. What do you think about that? And also anything else. We're with Rodney Hyde and Selwyn Manning. We're back after this. It is 7 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Gosh, a lot of feedback here. Pack and Save is promoting Buy Kiwi Made the past couple of days on our radio station. Tony says, out of my net pension of $350 per week, about 66% goes directly to tax without me or any business benefiting. Someone else says maybe all law should be reciprocal with foreign nations. Gemma says, why is Rodney suggesting that certain sectors of society should be excused from paying tax when he is happy to steal from taxpayers? I don't understand what Gemma says there, but there you go. That's all the feedback there. You can keep them coming. Text live to 3920. I actually want to talk about this because it was big in the week. Radio Live talkback, texting and driving. Almost 50% of the drivers ignoring the ban. I don't know where you what you see in your part of the country, Rodney, but I see it in Auckland. Certainly, there's a lot of texting and driving going on, and I think it's terribly dangerous. What do you think?
Yeah, it's more dangerous than talking on the phone, which is dangerous enough. And I think we have a lot of, dangerous behaviour. I've done a lot of travelling in the last 6 or 7 weeks around New Zealand, and I've just spent a week in the States driving around. And the comparison is dramatic.
Is that a fact? Tell us that, because I often hear, I've never been to the US, but are they less aggressive, more aggressive on the roads? What do you find?
Well, if you do the wrong thing, i.e. go down the road the wrong way, on the wrong side, or, fail to give way, they get pretty upset.
I can imagine.
But, they're not aggressive drivers in terms of, like we have in New Zealand, and they're not dangerous drivers. They've got a great sense of safety, I felt, and I feel that in other countries. But here in New Zealand, they're texting, we're chatting on the phone, we're speeding less, but we're travelling closer. And that's the thing that surprises me, how close, and then you'll see someone swap 3 lanes in front of a whole line of cars. And I think, God, is everyone in that much of a hurry in this country to get somewhere?
Selwyn, this is probably the biggest issue on Talk Radio. It's huge, this one, about how aggressive we are compared to other countries. The texting and driving one, I guess I brought up because it for some reason, it irks me personally because it's almost like I don't give a toss about what's around me. I'm just going to deal with what's on my phone right now. It seems to be quite an insolent sort of behaviour. What do you think?
One of the things that gets me wild when I'm driving around and I see someone cut me off and someone it's texting on the phone. Look, it was one of the best things I think that John Key's new government did in 2008. They first came in, they made that wrong. They made it, illegal to be able to do that, right? To text in cars when you're driving. Harry Dynhoven, the transport minister prior to that, had sat on that kind of issue for so long that John Key's lot thought, right, we'll get in, we'll do this straight away. Good. Okay, we'll make sure that the police are actually enforcing it if that's the case, because it is a danger and it can absolutely, and has in the past, causes mayhem, doesn't it?
What do you reckon about...
It goes to a deeper issue, though, doesn't it, of texting, because you'll see people in the middle of dinner at a restaurant or, in a social engagement, and the text arrives, and everything gets dropped, and the phone gets picked up, and it's not just young people, and the text seems to take priority. And my favourite thing was I was at a food hall the other day, and there were these 5 young friends all meeting up for lunch, and all 5 of them were busy texting. And they did it for the whole half hour that they were eating. And I think the issue is that...
Is it funny?
It's a killer of conversation.
For some reason, when we get text, takes priority over everything, including driving our car at 100 kilometres an hour down a highway.
And including talking to each other. So do you have a personal, when you're with your partner, Rodney, or with a friend, might you put your cell phone off the table?
Well, I was the worst. When I was a politician, I just lived on my mobile phone, and now... I don't know whether this is sad or not, but no one's phones will text me. I don't have a problem.
They may have done when they thought you were in the running for the ACT leadership.
Yeah, no, so, my phone just sits there. In fact, I look at it rather forlornly, because I see everyone else at the food hall and stopped at the lights and they're busy texting, and I look at my phone, and in the last 48 hours, no one's contacted me.
Rodney's silent old friend.
Well, get busy on Twitter, Rodney. Get busy on Twitter and social media.
I'm sure Facebook will give you a space as well.
I think that's a fantastic one, and I predict actually in 10 years' time we're going to actually have a reversal and actually get back to the ways of talking again. That's my prediction. I think that it'll...
I don't think it'll take 10 years, Wallace.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's going to be a tipping point. Hey, Rodney, hi, thank you very much. A great hour. And Selwyn, same to you.
Always good.